3 seconds before the bell rang, Owen was already flying backward through the air, and I knew exactly what sound was coming next. The wall. I had heard that sound only once before, months ago, when a training drone lost control and slammed into the training hall at full speed. It was a deep, heavy sound, like the whole building had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it out. Now I was about to hear it again, except this time it would not be a machine hitting the wall. It would be Owen, one of the strongest cadets in our entire class, thrown like a piece of loose equipment across the room. My name is Nolan, and before that morning, I thought I understood how our academy worked. I thought I knew who was strong and who was weak, who deserved respect and who did not. I was wrong about almost all of it, and I found that out standing against the back wall of the training hall, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles ached, watching a girl named Mara Whitlock end a fight before most of us even understood it had truly started. Let me back up, just a little, so you understand how we got here. Our academy trains cadets from many different worlds. We come from places with different suns, different air, different bones. Some of us are built for speed, some for strength, some for endurance in freezing cold or burning heat. We are brought together to become the next generation of peacekeepers, explorers, and defenders for a galaxy that is bigger and stranger than any single species could handle alone. Out of every species in our class, humans were the newest and the strangest to us. There was only one human cadet in our entire year, and her name was Mara. She was quiet. She kept to herself. She was not the tallest cadet, not the widest, not the one with claws or scales or 6 limbs. By every visible measure, she looked like the easiest person in the room to underestimate. And underestimate her, we did. It started with words, the way most trouble does. Owen, Felix, and Callan were 3 cadets from a species built for combat. Their homeworld had produced generations of warriors, and it showed in everything about them, from the way they walked to the way they looked at everyone else. Like the rest of us were simply waiting to be proven weaker. They were fast, they were strong, they had never lost a sparring match against anyone in our year. They had also never faced Mara. It was Felix who said it first, during a weapons theory class, loud enough for half the room to hear. "I don't understand why they let her in," he said, nodding toward Mara without even looking at her directly, like she was a topic rather than a person sitting 3 seats away. Her whole species barely survived their own planet. What is she going to do out here? Apologize to the enemy? A few cadets laughed, not many, but enough. Mara did not turn around. She did not react at all, which somehow made the comment feel even more pointed, like it had missed her completely and bounced off into empty air. I remember watching her shoulders, waiting for some kind of response, and getting nothing. I leaned toward her later that day, during a break between classes, mostly out of curiosity. "Doesn't that bother you?" I asked. What he said. She looked up from the small screen she had been reading and shrugged, like the question surprised her. "Not really," she said. "People believe what they believe until something changes their mind. I don't need to convince him of anything." I remember thinking that was a strange answer, almost too calm. I did not yet understand that calm was not the same as weak, and that the quietest person in a room is sometimes the one who has the least reason to be loud. Owen, Felix, and Callan did not let it go, though. Over the following days, the comments grew bolder. They started calling her the fragile one in the hallways, loud enough for her to hear, but phrased just carefully enough that no instructor would call it out directly. They mocked the way she moved during physical training, exaggerating her steps, laughing when she lifted lighter weights during strength drills, not understanding or not caring that different bodies are built differently. What none of them seemed to notice was that Mara never actually looked tired. She never seemed to be struggling. She simply did the exact amount required and stopped, calm and unreadable, while the rest of us pushed ourselves red-faced and out of breath, trying to prove something. I started noticing small things after that. The way she watched everyone else train instead of talking. The way her eyes moved across a room, taking in exits, distances, and angles. The way someone reads a map instead of a conversation. The way she never joined the casual sparring matches during free practice, even when invited. I asked her about that too, once, during one of the rare moments we ended up walking the same corridor after evening drills. You never spar during free time, I said. Everyone else does. Why not? She was quiet for a moment, like she was deciding how much to explain. Where I come from, she said slowly, practice fighting isn't really something you do for fun. It's something you do when you have no other choice. I don't love repeating that feeling if I don't have to. I did not understand what she meant then. I assumed she was talking about some kind of personal discomfort, maybe even fear. Looking back now, I realize I had it backward entirely. She was not afraid of fighting. She simply did not see the point in doing it without a real reason, because on her world, a real reason usually meant staying alive. The tension in our class kept building anyway, day after day, the way pressure builds behind a door before someone finally opens it. Owen, Felix, and Callan grew louder, more confident, more certain that Mara's silence meant she had no answer for them. They began telling other cadets that humans were a soft species, protected the moment they left their homeworld, unable to handle real physical challenge. They said it in the dining hall. They said it in the training yard. They said it finally, directly to her face. 3 days before the morning, everything changed. It happened after evening drills, in the main hallway outside the training hall, where cadets from every year passed through at the same time. Owen stepped in front of her, blocking her path, with Felix and Callan flanking him on either side like they had planned the moment in advance. "You know," Owen said, loud enough for the entire hallway to hear, "some of us have been talking. We think it's unfair that you get to sit in every combat class and never actually prove anything. Maybe it's time you show everyone what a Death World girl can really do." Mara did not step back. She did not raise her voice either. "Is that a challenge?" she asked, "or just talking?" Felix laughed, sharp and confident. "Call it whatever you want. Training hall, before the morning bell. All 3 of us. See how long you last." I was standing close enough to see her face in that moment, and I want to be honest about what I saw, because it surprised me. There was no fear there, no hesitation. If anything, there was something closer to tired patience, like a person being asked the same question for the 100th time and finally deciding to just answer it instead of explaining why the question didn't make sense. "Fine," she said, "before the bell." Word spread through the academy faster than any announcement an instructor could have made. By the next morning, cadets from every year were crowding into the observation platforms above the training hall, whispering bets to each other under their breath. Almost everyone assumed the same outcome. 3 trained warriors from a combat species against 1 quiet human girl who had never once volunteered for a sparring match. The math seemed obvious. I found a spot near the front railing, close enough to see everything clearly, my chest tight with an emotion I did not fully understand yet. Part of me wanted to see Owen, Felix, and Callan finally face someone who would not simply agree with their version of the world. Another part of me, the honest part, was afraid for Mara. I liked her. I did not want to watch her get hurt over 3 cadets' pride. The training hall doors opened, and Mara walked in alone, wearing the same plain training gear the rest of us wore. Nothing special, nothing reinforced. Owen, Felix, and Callan entered from the opposite side, already loose and confident, stretching their arms like this was simply another morning exercise before breakfast. The instructor on duty, a tall officer named Commander Ashford, stepped between them with clear reluctance written across his face. "This is meant to be a controlled demonstration," he said firmly, looking at each of them in turn. "Standard rules. First to yield or fall outside the ring ends the match. Nothing more than that." Owen nodded, barely listening, his eyes fixed on Mara like she was already finished. "Understood," he said. Commander Ashford stepped back, raised one hand, and the entire hall went silent, in a way I had never experienced before, dozens of cadets holding their breath at once. "Begin," he said, and that is where I need to stop for a moment, because what happened in the next few seconds changed the way every single person in that room understood the galaxy we lived in, and it deserves to be told exactly as it happened, without rushing past it. Owen moved first, exactly the way I expected him to. He used the same opening technique every strength-based cadet learns in their first year, a fast-forward step meant to close distance before the opponent can react. Against most of us, it worked every time. I had seen him use it a dozen times in practice matches, and it always ended the same way, with his opponent stumbling backward under the force of his advance. Against Mara, it looked different from the very first half-second. She did not step back. She did not brace herself the way we were trained to brace against a heavy strike. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly to one side, almost lazily, and used a small motion of her arm to redirect the force of his advance instead of meeting it directly. It looked simple, it looked almost gentle, and yet Owen's own momentum, the very speed and strength he was so proud of, carried him past her and directly toward the wall behind her. The sound that followed was the one I described at the very beginning, the deep, heavy sound of something solid meeting something immovable. Owen slid down the wall afterward, blinking rapidly, clearly trying to understand what had just happened to him. The entire training hall went silent. I remember looking around at the other cadets on the platform, and every single face mirrored the same confusion. Nobody laughed. Nobody cheered. We were all too stunned to make a sound. Felix recovered first, his confidence cracking slightly but not breaking. He must have assumed Owen had simply misjudged his angle, some small mistake in footing that anyone could make. He adjusted his approach immediately, choosing a grappling technique instead, one built to bring an opponent down to the ground where size and strength usually decide everything. He moved quickly, reaching for her with both arms extended, clearly intending to lock his grip around her and use his greater mass to control the exchange. For a brief moment, it looked like it might work. His hands closed around her shoulder and arm. Then something happened that I still find difficult to fully describe, even now. Mara did not resist his grip the way we were taught to resist, by pulling away or bracing against it. Instead, she used his own forward motion, folding her body slightly and turning with him rather than against him, guiding his weight in a direction he had not chosen for himself. It happened so fast that most of us on the platform only understood it after it was already finished, the same way you understand a sound only after it has already passed. Felix left the ground entirely for a moment, turning through the air in a way that should have been impossible for someone his size, and landed against the same wall Owen had already struck, several steps further along its length. The impact was louder this time, sharper, and for the first time, a few cadets on the platform actually gasped out loud. I found myself gripping the railing tighter, my heart pounding in a way I had never felt during any training exercise of my own. 2 cadets down, both stronger and faster than almost anyone in our year, and Mara had not raised her voice, had not changed her expression, had not even seemed to move quickly. It was as if she was simply redirecting weather, letting the storm exhaust itself against something sturdier than the storm expected. Callan remained standing at the edge of the ring, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something on his face that looked almost like uncertainty. He had watched both of his companions attempt very different approaches, and both had ended the exact same way. I could see him recalculating, trying to understand what he had just witnessed, searching for some explanation that made sense within everything he believed about strength and combat. Commander Ashford stepped slightly closer to the ring, his own expression unreadable, though his eyes moved rapidly between Mara and the 2 cracked sections of wall behind her. "Callan," he said carefully, "you do not need to continue this." Callan did not answer immediately. He looked at Mara, who stood exactly where she had been standing since the match began, breathing normally, her posture calm and unchanged. There was no triumph on her face, no excitement. If anything, she looked almost patient, like someone waiting for a delayed transport to finally arrive. "I need to understand," Callan said quietly, mostly to himself. "I need to see it myself." He shifted into a stance I recognized immediately, one used by only the most advanced combat students in our year, a technique built around speed and precise timing rather than raw strength alone. It required years of discipline to execute properly, and Callan was widely considered the best in our class at using it. If Owen's mistake had been overconfidence, and Felix's mistake had been assuming brute strength would succeed where speed failed, Callan's approach was different. He was trying to actually solve the puzzle in front of him, treating Mara like a genuine problem rather than an easy target. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope this final approach might actually change the outcome. Callan moved with real precision, testing the distance between them with quick, controlled steps rather than a single reckless advance. He circled slightly, watching her reactions, clearly trying to find some opening the other two had missed in their rush to finish quickly. Mara watched him with the same calm attention she gave to everything, her eyes tracking his movement without any visible tension in her shoulders or hands. She did not retreat from his circling. She did not attempt to close the distance either. She simply waited, adjusting her own position slightly whenever he adjusted his, like two magnets maintaining the same careful distance from each other. The hall was utterly silent now except for the soft sound of their footsteps against the training floor. Even the cadets who had been laughing and placing bets only minutes earlier stood frozen, watching with complete focus, sensing that something important was happening in front of them, something that would be talked about for the rest of the year regardless of how it ended. Callan made his move suddenly, a fast, controlled strike, aimed with far more precision than either of his companions had managed. It was, without question, the best individual technique I had ever seen a cadet in our year execute. For a fraction of a second, I genuinely believed it might land. It did not. Mara moved at the exact moment his strike committed fully, when it was too late for him to adjust or pull back. She did not block it directly. She did not meet his strength with her own. Instead, she used the smallest possible motion, redirecting the very last portion of his committed movement, just enough to send his own force past her rather than into her. The physics of it seemed almost unfair, the way his own speed and commitment became the exact thing working against him. He continued forward, past where Mara had been standing, his own momentum now completely unopposed and unguided by his own control. At that exact moment, I heard the bell begin to ring, marking the official start of the Academy Day, its familiar tone cutting through the hall at the worst possible instant for anyone hoping the day would begin normally. Callan's shoulder met the wall exactly where the previous two impacts had already cracked the surface, and this final impact was enough to send a visible fracture spreading further along the wall itself, small pieces of the reinforced surface falling to the training floor below. The sound echoed through the hall even after the bell had finished ringing, and for a long moment, nobody moved at all. 3 cadets, each considered among the strongest fighters in our entire year, now sat or leaned against the same section of wall, each one blinking, catching their breath, trying to process what had just happened to them in less than 2 minutes combined. Mara stood exactly where she had been standing the entire match, her breathing calm, her expression unchanged, looking at the cracked wall with something that almost resembled mild concern, though not for herself. "I hope that wasn't expensive to repair," she said quietly, mostly to Commander Ashford, who was staring at the fractured surface with an expression I had never seen on an instructor's face before. Nobody on the observation platform said a single word. I looked around at the other cadets, and every face mirrored the same stunned silence I felt myself. Whatever we thought we understood about strength, about danger, about who deserved fear and who deserved dismissal, had just been completely rewritten in front of us, and none of us yet understood exactly how far that rewriting would go. Commander Ashford finally cleared his throat, stepping fully into the ring now, moving between the fractured wall and the 3 cadets still recovering from their attempts. "Someone," he said slowly, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall, "is going to explain to me exactly what training methods produced that." He was not looking at Owen, Felix, or Callan when he said it. He was looking directly at Mara. Mara did not answer right away. She glanced at Owen, Felix, and Callan, still gathering themselves near the base of the cracked wall, and something in her expression softened slightly, like she genuinely had not wanted things to go this far. "It wasn't training methods," she finally said, "not the kind you're thinking of." Commander Ashford folded his arms, waiting, and the entire observation platform leaned forward as one, as if we could somehow hear better by leaning. "Then explain it to me," he said, "because 3 of my strongest cadets just ended up in the same wall, and I need a reason I can put in a report." Mara let out a breath, long and slow, the kind of breath someone takes when they are about to say something they have avoided saying for a long time. "Can we sit down somewhere?" she asked. This isn't really a short answer. That request alone told me something important. Whatever she was about to share was not a quick trick or a clever technique she had picked up somewhere. It was something bigger, something she had clearly been carrying quietly the entire time she had been among us. Commander Ashford agreed, dismissing the rest of the observing cadets back to their morning schedules, though almost nobody actually left the hallway outside the training room entrance. I managed to stay close enough to hear, along with a handful of other cadets who were either too curious or too stunned to follow the normal routine of the day. Owen, Felix, and Callan remained as well, sitting quietly on a bench along the side of the hall, listening with the same intense focus as everyone else, their earlier confidence completely replaced by something closer to genuine curiosity. Mara sat down across from Commander Ashford, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked like she was searching for the right place to begin. "You already know my homeworld is classified as a death world," she said. "I've heard people use that word around me since I arrived. Some of you use it like an insult. A few of you use it like a joke. I don't think most of you actually understand what it means." Commander Ashford nodded slowly. "Explain it to me the way you understand it," he said. "Not the way it's written in our records." Mara was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Earth isn't dangerous because of one single thing," she said. "It's dangerous because everything about it pushes in the same direction. The gravity is heavier than most worlds you're used to. Our air pressure changes constantly depending on where you are. We have deserts that can end a life in a single day without water, and we have oceans deep enough to crush most equipment your ships aren't built to survive under. And that's before you even consider what lives there with us." She looked around at the gathered cadets, most of whom were listening in complete silence now. "We share our planet with animals built to hunt," she continued. "Not one or two dangerous species kept in isolated regions. Dozens of them, spread across almost every environment we live in. Predators fast enough to catch a full-grown adult without difficulty. Animals strong enough to break bone without much effort. Some so quiet you would never know they were near you until it was already too late to matter." A few cadets shifted uncomfortably at that description, glancing at each other. "Where I grew up," Mara went on, "children are taught from a very young age how to recognize danger before it becomes a problem. Not because our parents want to frighten us, because ignoring the signs has a cost that isn't survivable. We learn how animals move before they attack. We learn which sounds mean nothing and which sounds mean something is close. We learn how our own bodies react under stress, because on Earth, staying calm during a dangerous moment is often the difference between walking away and not walking away at all." Commander Ashford's expression had shifted from simple curiosity to something more serious, more attentive. "You're describing an entire childhood built around danger," he said. "I'm describing an entire species built around it," Mara replied. "It's not something we think about constantly. It's just part of how we grew up, the same way your species probably grew up learning your own environment's rules without thinking of them as extraordinary." I found myself thinking back to that conversation we had in the hallway, days earlier, when I asked her why she never joined free sparring. Suddenly her answer made complete sense, in a way it hadn't before. "You asked me once why I don't spar for fun," she said, looking directly at me now, and I felt a small jolt of surprise that she remembered that conversation at all. "This is why. Where I come from, practicing how to move under pressure isn't really a game. It's something we did because the alternative was worse. I don't dislike training. I just don't think of it the same casual way most of you seem to." Felix, still sitting on the bench with a fading mark along his shoulder from the earlier impact, spoke up for the first time since the match ended, his voice noticeably quieter than it had been that morning. "But the way you moved," he said, "that wasn't just caution, that was control. Real control. Where does that come from?" Mara considered the question carefully before answering. "Some of it is instinct built over generations," she said. "Humans who reacted too slowly to danger simply didn't get the chance to pass that slowness along. Some of it is deliberate training, the kind almost every human learns in some form growing up, whether it's formal instruction or simply lessons passed down by family. And some of it, honestly, is something I don't think I can fully explain in words. It's less about thinking through each movement and more about letting the movement happen before the thinking gets in the way." "You made it look effortless," Owen said quietly, still staring at the floor, "like it cost you nothing." "It's not effortless," Mara said, her voice softening slightly. "It's familiar. Those aren't the same thing. I was tired after that match. I just don't show tiredness, the same way maybe you're used to seeing." Commander Ashford leaned back slightly, processing everything she had said, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the cracked section of wall visible through the open training hall doors. Your species classification in our records lists you as physically unremarkable, he said slowly. Below average strength compared to several other Academy species. Below average speed as well, according to standard testing. That's probably accurate, Mara said simply. Compared to Owen or Felix or Callan in a straight strength contest, I would lose every single time. I'm not stronger than them. I'm not faster than them either. Not in a simple sprint. Then how? Callan asked, finally speaking for the first time, his voice carrying real confusion rather than any lingering anger. Did you beat all three of us without seeming to try? Mara turned to look at him directly, and there was no satisfaction in her expression, only honesty. Because strength and speed aren't the only things that decide a fight, she said. Where I come from, most dangerous situations aren't won by whoever is stronger. They're won by whoever reacts correctly, at the right moment, without hesitation. You each committed fully to your first movement, trusting that your strength or speed would be enough on its own. I didn't need to match your strength. I only needed to use the moment you committed against you. The hallway remained quiet for a long moment, after she finished speaking, everyone absorbing what she had just described. It was strange, hearing something so simple laid out so plainly, and yet understanding, for the first time, just how much weight was hiding underneath that simplicity. Is that common? Commander Ashford asked carefully. Among your entire species, or are you unusually skilled, even among your own people? Mara thought about the question seriously before answering. I'd say I'm fairly ordinary, honestly, she said. There are people back home who could have handled that match far more efficiently than I did, in far less time. I've had a normal amount of training for someone my age. Nothing special compared to actual specialists. I could see it settling onto every face around me, the same slow realization arriving all at once. If what she described as fairly ordinary had just ended three of our Academy's strongest cadets in a matter of seconds, then the word ordinary meant something entirely different when applied to her species than it meant for the rest of us. Owen finally lifted his head, looking directly at Mara with an expression that held none of the arrogance from before. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Everything I said before this morning was wrong. Not just wrong about you, wrong about your entire species. Felix and Callan nodded in agreement, both looking genuinely uncomfortable now, the weight of their earlier comments clearly settling on them in a way that felt very different from any punishment an instructor could have handed down. Mara accepted the apology with a small, tired smile. I appreciate that, she said, but I'd rather you learn something from it than just feel bad about it. Being underestimated isn't really the problem for me. It happens constantly. The problem is when people underestimate each other, and it costs them something they can't get back. Commander Ashford stood slowly, looking between all four cadets with a new kind of attention in his eyes, the kind reserved for lessons far more important than anything scheduled on the Academy's official curriculum for that day. I think, he said, our approach to certain species classifications needs to be re-evaluated, immediately. He looked directly at Mara. I would like to speak with you privately after your classes today, he said. There are things I need to understand better, and I suspect you're the only person here who can actually explain them properly. Mara nodded, standing up from the bench, brushing a small amount of dust from her training uniform that had settled there during the match. As she walked past me toward the exit, she paused for just a moment, glancing at me with something that looked almost like gratitude, though I could not immediately place why. Thanks for actually listening earlier, she said quietly. Most people just hear the word Death World and stop paying attention after that. I did not have a good response ready in that moment. I simply nodded, still processing everything I had just witnessed and heard, feeling like the entire foundation of what I thought I understood about strength, danger, and my human classmate had shifted permanently beneath my feet. Behind us, workers had already begun arriving to assess the damage to the training hall wall, murmuring quietly to each other as they examined the deep fractures left behind by three separate impacts. I overheard one of them remark that repairing structural damage of that depth would normally require heavy equipment, the kind used for far larger construction projects than a simple training hall wall. It was strange, walking away from that hallway, knowing that the story of what happened that morning would spread through the entire academy before the day even ended. Stranger still was realizing that the story would not end there, because Commander Ashford's private meeting with Mara later that day would set off changes far larger than any of us expected, changes that would eventually reach far beyond our small academy and into how our entire alliance understood the species we had all been taught to think of as fragile. News of what happened in the training hall spread through the academy faster than anything I had seen before, faster even than exam results or transfer announcements. By midday, cadets from every year, every species, every wing of the academy had heard some version of the story, though the details grew more exaggerated with each retelling. By the time the story reached the youngest cadets, it had somehow grown to include claims that Mara had broken the wall clean through, or that she had defeated all 3 cadets simultaneously with a single motion. Neither claim was true, but I understood why people wanted to believe something even bigger than what had actually happened. What had actually happened was already difficult enough to accept. I found Mara later that afternoon, sitting alone near one of the outdoor training yards, watching a group of younger cadets practice basic footwork drills. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the morning's match, more like someone who had spent the entire day answering the same questions over and over. "Let me guess," I said, sitting down near her. "Everyone wants to know the same thing." "Pretty much," she said, allowing herself a small, tired smile. "I've explained gravity differences about 6 times today. I've explained predator behavior maybe 4 times. I think 2 people asked me if every human can do what I did, and 1 person asked if I was actually secretly some kind of elite soldier hiding among regular cadets." "Are you?" I asked, half joking. "No," she said, laughing quietly for the first time since I had known her. "I promise, I'm just a regular cadet who grew up somewhere complicated." I sat with her for a while, watching the training drills below, both of us quiet for a moment, before I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my mind since that morning. "Can I ask something serious?" I said, without it sounding like everyone else's questions today. She nodded, giving me her full attention. "Doesn't it bother you?" I asked, "growing up somewhere that dangerous? I don't mean the fighting skill part. I mean just existing there every day." Mara considered the question for a long moment, watching the training yard below without really seeing it. "It's complicated," she finally said. "When I was young, I didn't think of it as dangerous. It was just normal. You don't question the rules of the only world you've ever known. It's only after leaving, seeing how other species grew up, that I started understanding how different our situation actually was." "Do you resent it?" I asked. "Where you grew up?" "No," she said, without hesitation. "I think it made me who I am. I think it taught me patience and awareness and how to stay calm when things get difficult. Those aren't bad qualities to carry into a place like this academy. I just wish people understood it as a difference, not as some kind of insult or joke." I found myself nodding slowly, understanding a little more clearly now why she had never seemed bothered by the comments from Owen, Felix, and Callan. She wasn't ignoring them out of weakness or fear. She simply understood something about her own life that they didn't yet understand, and she was patient enough to wait until reality made the point for her, rather than arguing about it directly. Later that evening, I learned that Commander Ashford's meeting with Mara had expanded significantly beyond a simple private conversation. According to cadets stationed near the administration wing, several senior instructors and even a visiting officer from Academy Command had joined the discussion, all of them asking detailed questions about human physiology, training methods, and the specific classification criteria used to label Earth as a death world in the first place. I later heard, through cadets who worked administrative shifts, that the classification records for humanity had been written decades earlier, based on early scouting reports rather than any deep understanding of how humans themselves experienced their own world. The reports focused heavily on environmental hazards, listing predator numbers, weather extremes, and survival statistics, all technically accurate, but almost entirely focused on the dangers themselves, rather than on how effectively humans had learned to live alongside those dangers. One instructor, a strategic studies teacher named Professor Whalen, apparently told command staff directly that the Academy's understanding of humanity needed a complete revision, not because the original danger reports were wrong, but because they had failed to account for what growing up inside that danger actually produced in the people who survived it. We classified an entire species based on how dangerous their environment sounded on paper, Professor Whalen reportedly said, without properly considering what kind of person that environment would eventually create. That single sentence spread through the academy almost as quickly as the story of the match itself, repeated by cadets in hallways and dining halls over the following days, discussed in hushed, thoughtful tones rather than the earlier mocking whispers that had once surrounded Mara's presence among us. The change in atmosphere was gradual but unmistakable. Cadets who had once avoided training near Mara, uncertain how to interact with someone from a species they barely understood, began approaching her with genuine curiosity instead. Questions about combat gave way to questions about her homeworld itself, about the animals she had grown up around, about the different regions of Earth, and how drastically they varied from each other. I noticed something interesting during this shift, something that made me appreciate Mara even more than I already did. Despite suddenly becoming the most talked-about cadet in the entire academy, she never once used the attention to elevate herself above anyone else. When younger cadets asked her nervous, sometimes embarrassing questions about human abilities, she answered patiently, often downplaying her own skills rather than exaggerating them. "I'm really not special," she told a group of younger cadets one afternoon, while I happened to be nearby listening. "There are people back home far more capable than me in situations like that. I just happened to end up in a match against people who underestimated basic caution." One of the younger cadets, clearly still processing everything, asked her directly, "Then what would happen if someone actually tried hard against you, not holding anything back?" Mara paused for a moment before answering honestly. "Honestly," she said, "I'd probably still lose eventually against someone who trained specifically to counter what I do. I'm not unbeatable. I just react quickly to specific kinds of mistakes, the kind people make when they underestimate an opponent. Against someone who takes me seriously from the very beginning, the outcome might look very different." That kind of honesty, I realized, was part of why the shift in attitude toward her felt so genuine, rather than simply fearful. She never claimed to be invincible. She never used the story to build herself into some kind of legend. She simply explained, patiently and repeatedly, why her ordinary background had produced abilities that looked extraordinary to species who had never faced the same daily pressures growing up. Owen, Felix, and Callan, meanwhile, went through their own quiet transformation over the following days. Rather than avoiding Mara out of embarrassment, as I half expected they might, they instead began approaching her directly, asking genuine questions about the techniques she had used against them, clearly hoping to understand rather than simply move past the experience. I happened to witness one of these conversations myself, during a quiet moment between afternoon classes. Callan approached her first, his usual confidence replaced by something far more humble. "I've been thinking about that match every night since it happened," he admitted. "I keep trying to understand the exact moment things went wrong for me. Would you be willing to explain it, properly this time? Not to challenge you again, just to actually learn something." Mara studied him for a moment before nodding. "Sure," she said, "but I want something in return." Callan looked slightly wary. "What's that?" "An actual apology," she said simply. "Not the quick one from the hallway. A real one, where you actually mean it, and where you understand exactly what you're apologizing for." Callan's expression shifted, something genuine settling into his features. "I judged you based on assumptions I never bothered checking," he said slowly. "I decided your worth before ever actually seeing what you were capable of. That wasn't fair to you, and honestly, it wasn't smart of me either. I'm sorry." Mara accepted the apology with a small nod, her posture relaxing slightly. "Thank you," she said. "Now, let's talk about that grappling attempt Felix tried. That one was actually the closest any of you came to succeeding, even though it looked the same as the others from where you were standing. I stayed nearby, listening as she broke down the exact mechanics of the match in careful detail, explaining not just what she had done, but why it had worked against their specific approaches. It was fascinating watching the exchange shift from confrontation into genuine mentorship, 3 cadets who had once mocked her openly, now listening intently to every word she offered, taking real notes, asking thoughtful follow-up questions. By the end of that week, the Academy's atmosphere around Mara had transformed almost entirely. The whispers of mockery had been replaced by genuine curiosity and, in many cases, real respect. Instructors began incorporating small lessons about environmental adaptation into broader strategy classes, using Earth as a case study for how extreme conditions could shape unexpected strengths within a species. I remember Commander Ashford addressing our entire year during a general briefing near the end of that week, his tone more serious than usual. "I want to address something directly," he said, standing before the assembled cadets. "Several of you witnessed an event this week that challenged assumptions many of us held, myself included. I want to be clear that our academy exists to prepare all of you for a galaxy that is far larger and more varied than any single perspective can fully understand. Underestimating any species based on incomplete information is not simply embarrassing. It is dangerous, and in situations far more serious than a training hall demonstration, it could prove costly in ways none of us would want to experience." He paused, glancing briefly toward Mara, who sat quietly among the other cadets, her expression calm and attentive as always. "I would like to formally thank Cadet Whitlock," he continued, "for her patience in explaining something that should have already been clearly understood by every instructor in this academy. Her willingness to answer difficult questions honestly, rather than simply enjoying the sudden attention, reflects exactly the kind of character we hope to develop in every cadet who trains here." A quiet murmur of agreement moved through the room, and for the first time since her arrival, I saw Mara look genuinely surprised by a reaction directed toward her, rather than simply calm acceptance. Walking out of that briefing later, I found myself thinking about how quickly an entire academy's understanding of someone could shift, once genuine curiosity replaced careless assumption. It made me wonder how many other quiet, unassuming cadets around us might be carrying similarly unexpected depths, simply waiting for someone to actually ask the right questions, instead of jumping straight to conclusions. Weeks passed, and the cracked section of wall in the training hall was eventually repaired, though the maintenance crew reportedly left a small section of the original fracture visible beneath a protective panel at the specific request of Commander Ashford. When I asked him about it later, he simply said that some lessons deserved a permanent reminder rather than a clean erasure. Owen, Felix, and Callan became regular training partners with Mara over the following months, though calling their sessions training partners barely captures what actually developed between them. What began as an attempt to understand a single defeat slowly grew into genuine friendship, the kind built on mutual respect rather than forced politeness. I watched them spend hours in the training yard together, sometimes practicing combat techniques, other times simply talking about their different homeworlds, comparing environments and traditions with real curiosity rather than judgment. Callan, in particular, seemed to change the most. He had always been quick to judge based on appearance, but after that morning in the training hall, he became one of the most careful and thoughtful cadets in our entire year, often reminding other students not to assume anything about an opponent's true capabilities before actually observing them properly. "You don't know someone's strength by looking at them," he told a group of first-year cadets one afternoon, in a conversation I happened to overhear. "You know it by paying attention to how they carry themselves, how they react under pressure, and what they choose not to say. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way." Mara, for her part, slowly began joining free sparring sessions more often, though she remained selective about who she trained with and how intensely she engaged. She explained to me once that fighting for genuine practice among trusted training partners felt very different from the survival instincts drilled into her since childhood, and that she was slowly learning to separate the two feelings from each other. "It's strange," she admitted to me one evening, while we sat outside watching the sun set behind the academy's outer walls. "Back home, every serious physical encounter came with real consequences. Here, I'm learning that I can practice, make mistakes, even lose sometimes, without anything terrible happening afterward. It's taking some time to get used to that difference." "Have you lost since that match?" I asked, genuinely curious. She laughed softly. "A few times, actually. Callan caught me off guard during a technical drill last week. Fair fight, clean technique, and he earned it completely. I told him so afterward, too." That admission surprised me at first, until I realized it fit perfectly with everything I had learned about her since our first real conversation. She had never claimed to be unbeatable. She had simply reacted correctly against 3 cadets who underestimated basic caution and committed too fully to their first mistake. Against someone paying proper attention, playing carefully rather than assuming an easy victory, the outcome could look completely different, exactly as she had told those younger cadets months earlier. The story of that morning eventually became something close to legend within the academy, told and retold among incoming cadets, long after those of us who witnessed it firsthand had moved on to advanced training. I noticed the story shift slightly with each new class that arrived, the way stories naturally do over time, though the core lessons somehow remained intact no matter how the details changed. It was almost a full year later, during the arrival of a new group of first-year cadets, that I witnessed something that made the entire experience feel complete, in a way I hadn't expected. A new cadet named Preston, confident and loud in the exact way Owen, Felix, and Callan had once been, made a comment during an early combat theory class, apparently unaware of who exactly he was speaking near. "I heard the human cadets here are supposed to be some kind of secret weapon," he said loudly, glancing toward Mara with obvious skepticism, clearly not recognizing her from the countless retellings of the story that had spread across the academy. "Seems unlikely to me. She doesn't look like much." The reaction from the surrounding cadets was immediate and honestly somewhat amusing to witness. Several older cadets, including a few who had been present during the original match, turned toward Preston with expressions somewhere between disbelief and quiet concern. "You might want to be careful with that comment," one cadet warned him quietly. Preston laughed, clearly unconvinced. "Why? What's she going to do? Lecture me about gravity?" Callan, now well into his advanced training and widely respected as one of the most thoughtful senior cadets in the academy, happened to be walking past at exactly that moment. He stopped, looked at Preston with an expression of genuine sympathy rather than amusement, and gestured toward a section of the training hall wall nearby, the same wall that still bore its small hidden fracture beneath a protective panel. "See that wall," Callan said. "There's a story behind it. I'd suggest you learn it before you decide to test anything with her directly." Preston looked confused, glancing between Callan and Mara, clearly unsure whether to take the warning seriously. "What happened?" he asked. "Ask literally anyone who was here a year ago," Callan said simply, before continuing on his way, leaving Preston standing there, thoroughly confused, surrounded by cadets who were now quietly smiling at the memory the moment had unexpectedly stirred up. Mara, who had overheard the entire exchange, simply shook her head slightly, a small tired smile crossing her face as she returned to her own conversation nearby, clearly having grown used to this exact scenario repeating itself with each new group of arriving cadets. I found her afterward, still smiling faintly about the exchange. "Does that get old?" I asked. "Being some kind of legend now?" "Honestly, yes," she admitted, laughing quietly. "I never wanted to be some kind of cautionary tale. I just wanted people to actually think before deciding someone else's worth for them. I think that's exactly what happened, though," I said. "Just maybe not in the way you originally intended." She considered that for a moment, watching Preston still standing confused near the training hall entrance, now surrounded by several cadets, eager to finally tell him the full story properly. "Maybe you're right," she said. "As long as people actually learn something real from it, rather than just being afraid, I suppose I can live with being a small part of that lesson." Standing there, watching the entire scene unfold, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed since that single morning nearly a year earlier. Our entire academy's understanding of humanity had shifted permanently, not because of some dramatic display of aggression or overwhelming force, but because a quiet, patient girl had simply reacted correctly when 3 overconfident cadets underestimated her, and had then been willing to explain honestly why that reaction had worked the way it did. The deeper lesson, the one I carried with me long after leaving the academy myself, had very little to do with combat techniques or physical strength at all. It had everything to do with the danger of deciding someone's capabilities before actually understanding their full story, and the quiet, patient confidence of someone who never needed to prove anything to anyone, because she already understood her own worth long before anyone else around her caught up to that same understanding. Humans, I eventually came to realize, had not simply survived a dangerous world. They had grown alongside it, adapting so thoroughly to constant challenge that the very qualities other species saw as fragile weakness were, in fact, the visible surface of something far deeper and more capable underneath. It wasn't that humans had learned to fight against the deadliest predators their world had to offer. It was that, without ever fully realizing it themselves, they had quietly become something the rest of the galaxy simply hadn't learned to recognize yet. And somewhere within our Academy's walls, hidden beneath a small protective panel that Commander Ashford had insisted on preserving, a single cracked section of stone remained as a permanent, quiet reminder of exactly how quickly that recognition could arrive, whenever someone finally chose to challenge it before the bell had a chance to ring.